Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Dayton, Ohio, it's time for Dayton Business Radio. Now, here's your host.
Lee Cantor here, another episode of Dayton Business Radio, and this is going to be a good one. Today we have Jeff Hanna with us, and he is with Exhibit Concepts. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, Lee. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Before we get too far into things, tell us about Exhibit Concepts. How are you serving folks?
Well, Exhibit Concepts has been in the business for almost 40 years, but we do face-to-face marketing, broadly speaking. We create trade show exhibits in interior environments globally, and that includes everything from permanent interiors like museums, executive briefing centers, immersive educational environments, which is a new thing, a relatively new thing, emerging trend, and trade show exhibits both in the U.S. and internationally. So kind of a broad array of things. And we also, that does include mobile marketing vehicles as well. And nowadays we're launching into new territory more so, which is virtual exhibit platform, where we're able to take what's happening traditionally on the trade show floor and do it in a virtual environment based on the fact that everybody's basically stuck in their homes these days.
Now, the company, though, pre-pandemic was, it wasn't just temporary places. You also create permanent places as well, like when you said museums, or is it just the temporary exhibit within a museum?
No, it's actually the permanent interior environments and the permanent exhibits at museums around the country. The museum work is mostly in the U.S., but some of our permanent interior work is done outside the U.S., Singapore, and other places around the world. But yes, it's not the temporary exhibits, it's permanent, like the Computer History Museum, California. The Mississippi Civil Rights Museum is one that we recently did, which is awesome. Museum of Science and Technology, and just a number of them. The Navy SEAL Museum in San Diego. Those are the kind of museums that we design and produce.
Is there a different strategy when it's a permanent museum as opposed to a temporary, even a trade show? Like, is it the same when you're dealing with a customer that you're trying to give a good experience to? Do you attack it slightly differently if you know it's going to be there for a long time?
Yes, we do. And it's a good question. The process for the design development is a lot more intensive generally and more time consuming and spans over a number of months, starting with an interpretive plan, and it goes through a lot of iteration of design development. And so it's a lot more intensive, I would say, because it is the creation of something permanent and will probably have a lot more visibility over its lifespan than a trade show exhibit. So the trade show exhibit, effort, although important in the design phase, is a lot shorter, faster turnaround, generally speaking, and it's done within, a couple of weeks to a month or so. Sometimes for larger shows, we might spend a couple of months back and forth working on design development, whereas it's not uncommon at all in the museum world to spend, 6 months or more, even longer in times, to develop the interpretive plan and then get into the conceptual development phase. So yeah, and the approach is different, the time is different, and the level of intensity and research and everything that goes into developing the museum side and the content part is a lot more robust.
Now, let's talk about kind of the human behavior side of your business, because I would imagine in each case, you're trying to have a human being first see it and say, wow, this is amazing, and then interact with it at some level. How important is that element when you're doing any kind of design work?
Well, I think it's huge. I mean, you do want to attract people, and then you want them to really engage with it. You want them to get excited about whatever it is that you're attracting them to, and you want them to have a takeaway from it. So we are constantly looking at ways to interact with people, ways to attract people to look at certain things. How much information can they take in, and what ways and methods can they take it in? Are they just reading something? Are they interacting with something? Are they listening to something, watching something? And listening to something could be not only like an audio track or some kind of, but it might be musical, it might be sounds, it might be all kinds of different things. So, I mean, finding different ways to interact with people, attendees, and creating that experience is hugely important. And our design team really focuses heavily on understanding human nature, human behavior, uncovering that, especially for the target audience that we're trying to reach, and then what kind of form that needs to take so that we can get that in front of them and connect that with that person. And the more, our philosophy is the more senses you can stimulate, the more memorable the experience becomes. And so a large part of that is trying to get them to interact and engage and all that. And they don't always necessarily engage or interact the way you want them to, or they may be having a bad day, or not feel like engaging or whatever. So you may have different experiences, or you will have different experiences based on what's going on in an individual's life at the moment they interact with some kind of display or whatever it might be. But that's the point of it, is trying to reach people where they are and bring them outside of themselves and into a unique experience that's going to be memorable. And it might be something that in some of the museum work that we do, that we want to change behavior, or we want them to have a learning moment, or reach deep down inside and touch an emotional chord with them. And so there's a lot of different reasons, but yeah, that's hugely important.
Now, when you're working with a client at the beginning stages, and you're just trying to get an idea of, what is the outcome they desire, what is it they want the person to feel, I'm sure your solutions are things that aren't even, like, they don't even know how to ask or even kind of articulate what the finished product is. So how do you kind of guide them through this process to really get to the, maybe the 5 whys deep into why they are working with you and what they want to happen? Because I'm sure you're going to deliver something that's not something they are asking for directly, but you're trying to create like kind of an emotion that they want to have happen.
Yeah, that's true. Very good insight to that kind of question, but you're absolutely right. They ask us things, what they think they need, but what they're really asking for might be quite different than what they're articulating. So it isn't a, a short conversation. It ends up being a process that we go through to guide them. It's the discovery process that we call it, where we take them through either brainstorming sessions or design charrettes with all the key stakeholders within that organization, whether it's a corporation or a museum team or whatever kind of situation it is. Sometimes it's immersive educational environment, but we'll go through a process of discovery with them. And that means that our team does various kinds of exercises with them to get them to kind of try to articulate what it is they want the outcomes to be. Like you mentioned, the 5 things or whatever. We want to bring that out of them, but we want to bring that out of a number of people, not just out of one person, so that we can reflect that back to them in the planning process and say, this is what we're hearing that you wanted to achieve. Do you all agree with that? And get the stakeholder buy-in, if you will, before we start developing the concepts further. So it is a process. Sometimes it's individual meetings with people, sometimes it's group and team meetings, sometimes it's a full day design charrette, or it might be brainstorming sessions for a few hours, and you're doing different things, not only writing stuff on a whiteboard or whatever, but you're also doing exercises where people are kind of forced to wrestle with different aspects of the topic, and things come out of that process. So it's very productive, I guess I would say, in the end, and helpful as a way to get to that solution.
Right, and I would imagine it's very collaborative. Like, this is they're probably digging deeper than they probably imagine that they would have to in order to really deliver that kind of final product that stimulates the 5 senses.
Yes, absolutely. And collaboration is key. And we want them to be involved along the way, and that way it will be better. They're the subject matter experts typically in their field. If it's the Navy SEAL Museum, for example, or some company or group like that. So, um, they know, they have a sense of who their audience is, and sometimes that even comes into question if they think they know who their audience is, and sometimes through some of the research we find out that their real core audience isn't who they think it is. And you're going to do something quite differently if you're working on a children's museum than you are if you're working on something like the Navy SEALs.
Now, let's talk about the pandemic we're in now and the impact it's had on the trade show and event industries. How have you seen that play out? A lot of people are working from home. They're not going anywhere. The travel is kind of shut down. I'm sure that's had a dramatic impact into your world.
It has been particularly devastating, I think, to the face-to-face marketing. Trade show and event companies are really, really suffering right now. I mean, not only the travel industry and hotels and airlines, but shows are canceling. In the beginning, I was kind of downplaying it, and I thought, maybe a few shows will cancel and things will spring back in a few weeks. And then as time progressed, started to see how big this really was and how big the impact is and how long lasting it's going to be. And you started to see more and more shows canceling. So in the first few weeks, it was every day a number of series of shows were canceling. And even now, they're continuing to cancel through the end of this year. So, and I've also been, some companies have started to reach out, some owners or senior leaders at other companies have reached out to me recently just to share what they're going through and kind of what they're facing. And I think some of the companies that are solely engaged in the event and trade show sectors only are not going to make it. Unfortunately, some have already had to file bankruptcy, and others probably will be doing that soon. Thankfully, in our case, we're quite diversified in the permanent interior environments and other areas so that we can ride out that storm. But a lot of companies are not going to make it through this because they just simply don't have any work. And it looks like the return, most of the studies that have been done in our industry, most people believe it's going to be the first or second quarter at least of 2021, and some think even further than that before the trade show and event world returns to some sense of normalcy.
Now, are there any kind of leading indicators you're looking at to seeing how they are behaving that's kind of going to be a clue on how your world's going to open back up? Like, are you looking at how are they going to handle sporting events or things like that? Right now they're talking about, having sporting events without fans. So anything that how other people are attacking kind of large groups of people, I would think would be an indicator for you that, hey, this might be breaking or this is getting worse.
Yeah, it is stuff that we are looking at and monitoring pretty closely, including shows overseas. Germany has started to have some events, and China actually has started to have some new events start back with, safety measures in place and that sort of thing. So we are monitoring that, and there's a number of organizations like show organizer or associations and event industry associations like IFAS, International Federation of Exhibition and Event Services, EDPA, it used to be Exhibit, but it's Experiential Designers and Producers Association. A number of associations in our industry are monitoring those things and also working with the government as well to look at ways to be able to bring events back. I think the big thing is going to be consumer confidence. The show organizers are probably a little bit more willing at this point to put on the event if they think they're going to get the attendees. The issue is the attendees and some of the companies they work for are afraid to send them. And then if the exhibitors don't think they're going to have the audience, they don't want to spend the money to go to the show and put on the exhibit. So virtual is becoming a reality right now too. So that's one aspect. But It's a uncharted territory.
Now, you bring up virtual. Virtual has its advantages and disadvantages in this world. Virtual probably can attract bigger crowds in terms of anybody can tune in because it's virtual. But the negative is you're not kind of stimulating those five senses that you can in a face-to-face setting. How have you guys kind of responded to that? And do you have some solutions that kind of try to thread the needle?
Yeah, that's a good observation. What we've launched is through our Next Lab, which our Next Lab group is a team that I oversee. It's New Experiential Technologies Lab. And that's the group within Exhibit Concepts that does all the interactive and engagement kind of technology development stuff, including augmented reality, virtual reality, and so on. And that team within the company, along with some other parts of our team, creative department and so on, created a virtual exhibit platform. And you're right. Well, traditionally, face-to-face marketing people have always shied away from virtual events because they saw it as a threat. My outlook on it and the outlook of some right now is that we're embracing virtual events more because I think that, well, for one, that's the only option anyone has at this point. But number two, I think that as we go through this, there will be permanent changes that happen as a result of COVID-19 in the world and in our industry in particular. So my thinking is that virtual will find a balanced place within the face-to-face world. And like you said, it has a broader reach in many cases. And for people that can't, for one reason or the other, whether they might be sick, I'm talking about post COVID-19, in the future, whether people can't travel for one reason or another and can't go to a show, I think that shows will have a virtual dimension to them that they had not had before, so that it can have a longer lifespan or a longer shelf life. There will be aspects of it that can live on beyond just the event itself, which is great because shows typically, it's 3 days, 4 days, and after that, it's a photograph and a memory. So the good thing is it can have a little bit more existence beyond the actual event and reach people that couldn't be there otherwise. The downside is, yes, it doesn't have the stimulation aspect that you have, and people do get tired of sitting in front of their screen all day just looking at one webinar after the other. So what we're doing, to thread that needle in your term, is that we're making it interactive and engaging and using virtual reality or augmented reality kind of experiences to go along with that, which are different, and putting people in a more of an immersive environment and having them be more participatory where they are remotely. And so we think that's going to be a better solution than just being a non-interactive participant watching something online.
Well, that's a great pivot on your part and a great kind of attitude into leaning in to the circumstance and not try to just deny it and just say, okay, this is our new reality. Let's work with it as best we can and just put the kind of the weight on you in terms of, okay, we're going to figure out a creative solution that stimulates as many senses as possible and do the best we can under these circumstances. Well, kudos to you and your team.
Thank you. Thanks.
Now, for you personally, you've always been a thought leader in this space, and it shows in how you're handling this kind of crisis situation. Talk about some of the other work you do in terms of kind of sharing this knowledge you've learned over the years.
Well, I have outside of my work at Exhibit Concepts, I do have a website and a blog and a podcast referred to as the Global Exhibitor podcast and the Global Exhibitor blog and website. And I speak at a number of events and do interviews like this from time to time and speak on various topics related to the industry, which I really enjoy. I like teaching, and it's important to me, and I like to give back. And I think it's a really rewarding to be able to help people move forward in one way or the other, or give them a different perspective. And so with the Global Exhibitor podcast, we're able to, which is in its second season, and we're able to bring in a lot of guests from around the world and talk about cultural aspects of working together and how that manifests itself in the face-to-face world. So it's been really fun, exciting, and interesting, and you learn the most when you're doing like what you're doing, interviewing people and talking to them. You learn a lot through that process. So that's been, really rewarding for me, and I've learned a tremendous amount through it.
Now, at Exhibit Concepts, do you have certain kind of verticals that you work within, or do you, or is it kind of a free for all? You'll work with anybody.
Me personally, or the company
The
itself?
company Exhibit Concepts, like, is that? Do you have specialties that we're really good at technology, or that's our niche, or is it pretty much kind of wide open?
It's pretty broad, although I would say there's some industries that we probably don't work in so much, like the automotive industry. There are some companies that kind of specialize in automotive. We do some in the healthcare sector. We do a lot of technology work, but it's pretty broad, I would say, across the spectrum. But there's some that we probably don't do so much, which is automotive. But most of the other ones where we have a presence in, anything from technology to food service, and work with a lot of major brands, including companies like Kellogg's and companies like that you would know and recognize. So.
Now, for you, what's the most rewarding part? Is it the kind of coming up with the concept, the idea, or is it the actual when you're on the floor and then somebody comes in there and it's got a wow moment?
Yeah, I think, well, it's hard to beat that, having that wow moment. And, the unfortunate thing is some of our design team doesn't always get to go to the show to see the wow moments from the clients. So we try to get them out to shows when we can, but those individuals really do enjoy, getting to see people interact with something that they created in their mind as an idea, and to see that in 3D space on the floor and people are interacting with it. It's hard to beat that kind of experience and rewarding experience for you as a designer. So I think that's probably the most fascinating part of it. But we have a great team too, and they play off of one another. They motivate and inspire one another. I mean, I have to say, since I've been at Exhibit Concepts and we've been sort of going through some rebuilding process a little bit for the last several years in the creative area, and we have such a really dynamic and great team. I've never worked with such talented group of people before. They're just amazing.
Now, if somebody wanted to learn more about Exhibit Concepts, is there a website?
Yes, it's exhibitconcepts.com.
And then if they wanted to kind of check out your podcast, is there a website for that?
It is. Yes, it's just globalexhibitor.com. And it's on Apple Podcasts and
I'm sure wherever podcasts are found. That
typical platforms for podcasts. Yes.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for sharing your story today. It's an amazing story you've got, and the amount of work you've done and all the things you've accomplished is really impressive.
Well, thank you, Lee. I appreciate it, and it's good to talk to you again, and appreciate you having me on the show.
All right, this is Lee Cantor. We will see you all next time on Dayton Business Radio.